But to get started, like as mentioned, Iowa State is replacing two 1,000-yard receivers in Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll. Two different guys, but two obviously incredibly productive guys. But let's go look at what we got from the group last fall. Um, just you had Iowa State has always had a lot of pass catchers on the team. Like got a lot of guys that catch passes, which I know is catch passes, but it's they typically spread the ball around fairly well. Obviously, last season you see a huge spike up here at Jaden and Jalen, 80 catches apiece, over 1,100 yards apiece, and by far the majority of the touchdowns. Not a huge shock there. Behind them, you've got tight end Gabe Burkle, which he played all 14 games. Caught some very important passes. Was a chain mover towards the end. Especially the guy here we'll talk about when we get to the tight ends is Ben Bramer, that you would expect for him to jump up if he can stay healthy, which he obviously did not last year. But a couple of guys I want to talk about in the wide receiver room that I think emerged last year and are really interesting names. Um, Carson Brown and Eli Green, both at different points in the season, were thought to be, these are the backup. This is the backup to Jalen Knoll, because that was your question. If if you had Ben Nagoya on the outside, and you had a couple other guys filling on the inside, who was going to be the backup to Jalen Knoll? During the North Dakota game, we thought, well, it's going to be Eli Green, because he got in, had a couple really nice catches after and runs after the catch. We're like, okay, well, this is the guy. This is the guy that's going to replace Jalen. And then he didn't kind of really do much for a few games. And then as the season goes on, we see Carson Brown come out of nowhere. He was a former walk on from Ankeny that came in and played some really nice snaps, had some nice plays. And it became clear that he was the guy behind Jalen, and he did a nice job. It wasn't a game breaker, in a lot of situations, but he did a nice job, and obviously had a touchdown there. So, I think there's some interesting names there. If you keep going down the list, you get some young guys. Ben Nagoye is one of those guys. Is a guy that we thought, he did functionally back up Jaden Higgins this year and had some nice catches. This is a guy that has always felt like he is a big time athlete, huge athlete. He's like 6'3", and he's got like high end track speed. He's got a huge vertical. This is a guy that always, just based on the physical traits that he's got available to him, always felt like a guy that if he could get it together as far as his route running, get his technique down, and really get better at his craft at being a receiver, that he could take off. And we saw, he only had a couple catches this season, but the catches he did have he had a couple really important ones. And again, this feels like a guy that as soon as the light switch comes on, he can be a really high end receiver. But obviously, we have not seen that yet from him. He's been inconsistent. He didn't play much as a freshman at all, and we'll see what he does as a sophomore. This is a guy that has big time athleticism, but we got to see it from him as far as consistency, in getting him, especially downfield, because Rocco likes to throw the ball downfield. So if you can let Benny use his speed, that's a guy that can take the top off of a defense, but we got to see it from him. Next guy down, Brett Askelson. He really came on. Obviously, you can see he played a bunch. It was mostly on special teams. Came on really towards the last couple games of the regular season and into the bowl game, where you saw him make a few plays. Obviously only had a couple catches, but this is a guy I know that they were really excited about through camp and into the first part of the season, with just how quickly he was progressing. And I think it's a guy that you can look at as far as next year being, this guy can really be a nice rotation player. He's not like huge, 6'1", 190, but he was just a sophomore last year. And I think this is a guy that has a real chance in camp this year to bust through and get into the rotation. Next guy down, I think, is one of your contenders for really increasing his role next year, and that's Isaiah Alston. Typically, this Isaiah, I think, was one of the many stories that you see in college football where you see a transfer and they struggle to pick up with the speed, especially whether they're transferring from a lower level to a higher level, and it just takes them some time to catch up to the faster pace, to a different offense, to the better competition. It just takes them a second. And I think that's what happened here with Isaiah Alston. But you can see, I mean, he only had a couple catches, but they were for 26 yards apiece. And that was kind of what the the advertisement on him was coming out of Army as a transfer coming into last season was that Army doesn't throw the ball a lot, obviously, but when they threw it to him, he was an explosive receiver with high end speed up to down the field. And it's a guy that you can look at and say, okay, this is an obvious one where if he's caught up to the speed of Big 12 football and he's gotten used to the offense, this is a guy that in spring practice can make a ton of headway because he's got the size and speed, at 6'4", 200. I mean, that's a big receiver. He's got the size to be a wide receiver one if the light comes on and he's able to slow the game down. He's more familiar with the playbook and all that. That's an obvious candidate to make a big jump to wide receiver one role next season. A couple of these other guys down here are interesting. I don't know. We'll have to see. Dominic Overby only played in 6 games, but he did have the one catch, I believe, is at Utah. I think this is another guy that you're looking at as potentially being a guy with a lot of room to rise. He's not a big guy. He needed to put on some weight. He's 6'5", he's huge. He's really tall, but he's only 180 pounds, which is not nearly thick enough for how big his frame is. But he came out of school with track speed as a long jump champion out of Nevada, out of Utah. And he's got all the measurables there, kind of much like Benny Nagoye, where he's got all the measurables as far as size and speed that you want in like a wide receiver one type of frame. But it's a guy, he just played 6 games as a freshman, and he can make a lot of room in the spring and becoming more of a, expanding his route tree, especially being more of an underneath runner. Because right now his skill set mostly lends him to running deep routes and to running kind of deep crossers where he can really open up his speed a little bit. His technique currently right now doesn't allow him to be super effective underneath, like on slants and dig routes and crossing routes. But that's a guy that, like I said, he can make a lot of headway this spring if he's working on his craft. He can move up, he can fly up that depth chart pretty quickly. Kai Black is I believe he's going to be a junior. Yeah, he's going to be a junior. He's out of Urbandale. He's got a good frame on him. I believe he's like 6'3". Just haven't seen a lot of him so far, and we'll see if he can make a jump. The story is that there is a lot of room on the depth chart for guys to rise up, because you've got 2 major vacancies at wide receiver one. So you're looking at this depth chart. There's a ton of opportunity for these young guys. They did grab a couple receivers in the recruiting class, which we'll go through here in a second, but there's not an obvious number 1 receiver on this team right now, as far as like, okay, this guy's going to be wide receiver 1, this guy's going to be wide receiver 2. And that's not because there isn't talent there or there's not experience there. It's just that when you lose 167 catches or whatever it is off of your team, that's a lot of targets to go around. The incoming guys that I think are really going to be that I would say did a nice job in the transfer portal here. I would say did a really nice job in the transfer portal at receiver and in the freshman class as well. But anymore, you're really talking about the transfer portal as far as getting immediate impacts. We will come back to the freshman here because there's a couple really interesting names in there. But let's go ahead and go down to our transfers. The first one to commit was Xavier Townsend. Xavier Townsend was originally it was actually a long time ago, was an Iowa State verbal commit and then flipped to UCF before his freshman season. He went there and mostly at UCF, we saw a lot of him running jet sweeps and things like that. They really didn't throw the ball to him downfield very much. And I think that's largely a product of UCF's offense and their quarterback talent, which has been not great the last couple seasons. They had KJ Jefferson this season. He wasn't very good. And then they switched to a couple other guys. They just didn't have the guys to throw the ball to him downfield very much and really utilize his speed, because Xavier Townsend is a high-end athlete, 5'11", 185. Got tons and tons of speed. I think Iowa State will know how to use him, and I think you're going to see Xavier Townsend play the Jalen Noel route, the Jalen Noel role, where you're going to see him in all sorts of route trees. You'll see him on deep posts, burning guys down the seam. You'll see him run underneath routes. You'll see him in jet sweeps. You'll see him in screens. The best way you can use Xavier Townsend in your offense is to just get him the ball with a blocker in front of him. He is an exceptional athlete, and I really, really excited. I was very excited to see when Townsend came here, because he transferred after the fourth game of the season to preserve his red shirt. So he didn't even lose a year of eligibility, and this is a guy that I think he's gonna have multiple years in Ames. He is gonna right now. I think he's the shoe in. I think he's the clubhouse leader to be your slot guy, just because he's so versatile. You could stick him back there to return kicks and punts like Jalen Noel did. He can run the same route tree that Jalen did. We'll see what his technique looks like as far as getting open, but he's got all the athleticism in the world to be able to do that, and he's got lots and lots of game experience as well. Dynamic playmaker. The other guy here that I'm very, very excited about is Chase Soule. So Chase Soule was originally a Colorado Buffalo that was shown the door essentially when Deion Sanders came, and he transferred to East Carolina and had a really nice really nice year there. I think he was there for 2 years. He's 6'4". If you watch his tape, he's really good after the catch. He's not afraid to put his shoulder down and try to run through guys, but he's a good athlete. I mean, very comparable to a Jaden Higgins. Does he have the same kind of top end speed? I'm not sure. We'll have to see it on the field. Field speed and timed 40 speed are two different things. But looking at his tape, he's certainly fast enough to play in the Big 12 and to get open. So this is your guy that if you're looking at your clubhouse leader to replace Jaden Higgins, this is your guy. And like I said, there's the other guys that are already on the roster will have plenty of opportunity to rise up, because these guys are going to be new to the program. They're going to be new to the offense, new to the terminology and all that. But Chase Soule was highly sought after transfer. I have to see if I can see what his offers were. He had a lot of big time teams after him. I know Miami was one that he was really looking at a lot, and he's from that area too. So Miami was one that when they offered him, I was a little worried about. But he is honestly, really, really big time. Let's see. Let me review his recruiting profile here. So he came out as a mid 3-star, didn't have a lot of offers coming out, but went to Colorado, and then obviously has worked his way up. He had a lot of big time offers when he was this past offseason transferring out of East Carolina, and Iowa State got him. I'm assuming that's on the basis of, they saw what they did. He saw what they did with Jaden Higgins last year and said, I'm roughly the same size of guy, same kind of athleticism. They can use me in the exact same way. And I think that's what Iowa State intends to do, is to essentially make a 1-for-1 replacement for Jaden Higgins. And I think he's got the size and he's got the skill to do it. And he's the guy too that is also very, very good after the catch. He can make plays. If you're running him like on a crosser route or a slant or something like that, he can do damage after the catch with his feet. So there's a lot of room for different pass catchers on this team. I'm excited about the guys they brought in with transfers, because I think with Soule and Xavier Townsend, I think you have two guys there that can be your kind of clubhouse leaders to take over the 1 and 2. But it's certainly not a guarantee. They're just transfers, so they're certainly not a guaranteed to start. And you've got guys on the roster already that look like they can contend for that role. And we'll know more after spring practice. We'll see, with the roster sizes changing, maybe you see, if a Benny Nagoye can't break his way up into the roster, does he look for snaps someplace else? I'm not sure. I have no idea. I have no inside info that Benny is going to transfer or anything like that. But, it'd be one of those where maybe he decides to do that. We'll know a lot more about this position room after spring ball, when we see, who kind of pops up a little bit further up on the depth chart, who's getting some A little bit of hype. Some of the birdies started chirping about who's getting a little bit of hype coming out of spring practice, if anybody transfers, things like that. A couple of the guys. Let's look at the freshmen here real quick. They signed 3 of them this class: Dylan Malone, and Karen Brookins. I think are both interesting guys. The 6'4", 6'3", they're taller, big body guys. I don't think they'll play a lot this fall. The guy I think that if you're gonna see one of these 3 play more than their red shirt this year, I would look at Xavier Robinson. He's a really high-end athlete. In high school, he had a little bit of trouble staying healthy, but when he is able to stay healthy, he is a big-time explosive athlete that I'm really excited about. He's 6 foot, $175, which isn't huge, but when you're playing in a slot, Jalen Knoll was only got 100, 5'10", 190 pounds or 185 pounds or something like that. Was not a big, heavy guy. In modern football, you don't need to be some big burly dude. If you can run good routes and you have the speed to do it, they can get you the ball anywhere. Xavier Robinson, I think, is a really interesting name. Freshmen are really interesting. I don't think you're going to see any of these play a ton this year, but if I was going to pick one that's going to see some time, maybe even as a returner, something like that, I think Xavier Robinson is the guy. West Des Moines Valley, so local kid. As long as he as long as he's can stay healthy, I think he's got a chance to be a big time playmaker.